Of listening to Jesus. This has been the second half of our prayer series where we haven't just been talking about how we talk to God, but now we're trying to focus in on how we actually listen for the voice of God. This was supposed to be our final week, but we're actually going to be adding another week next week. There's one more thing that I think God wants us to talk about next week, so we'll get into that. But this past weekend, last weekend, I was not here with you because I was in Denver, Colorado at the National Convention of the Church of God. And of all the different sessions that we attended and the speakers and the worship and the things, the thing that was the most beneficial for my life over those 5 days was the time I got to spend with two of my best friends. Two guys that no matter what's going on in my life, they know that they have the permission to speak into my life, and people that I know that God will lay something on my heart for them. Like that to me was probably the most beneficial thing that happens. And I was reminded this past week of how thankful I am that God placed people in my life that he can use to speak to me. That's what I want to talk to you about today, is that another way that God speaks to us is through other people. God uses other people to sometimes get messages to us in ways that we might not have been able to get them otherwise. And so my question to you as we get going is, do you have those people in your life? Do you have those people in your life that have permission to speak into your life? And I know for all of us on some level, you go, yeah, I've got friends and things like that. And I'm not talking about do you have friends. I'm talking about, do you have good, godly people in your life that have the evidence that they're following Jesus, that when they speak, it would be worthwhile to listen to them? Do you have the right people in your life that God can speak through? And I get a little bit nervous when I watch the current state of church, because over the last couple of decades, church became this activity that we just attend, this place that we show up. And we have forgot that church, this here, right here, the family of God, it's not an activity simply to attend, but it's a family to belong to. And there's people that will attend a church and be completely disconnected from the people God has placed in that church. And it's almost like turning the radio volume all the way down to where you cannot hear what God might have to say, because the only people that you're connected to are people that are outside of the family of God. Because we didn't realize that church wasn't just something to attend, it's a family that we're supposed to belong to. In week 2, we talked about how God speaks to us through the scriptures, and I told you that a lot of us were wondering why God is so silent when our Bibles look like this. They're closed. The same would be true if you don't have people in your life that are good, godly influences that can speak into your life. It's a lot like a closed Bible. It's a channel that's turned off, that God can't get those messages through to you. And we see the importance of this all throughout the scripture. There was the prophet Samuel had Eli help him discern the voice of God. We have David. After King David's major sin, God sends the prophet Nathan to him to rebuke him for what he had done. We see Moses, whenever he's trying to lead the whole Israelite clan, Jethro shows up, and Jethro goes, "What you're doing is not good. Here's how you ought to do it." And he gives him good, godly, sound advice of how to lead the people. You see Priscilla and Aquila in the New Testament correcting Apollos whenever he's wrong. You see Ananias helping Saul receive his sight and begin to walk with Jesus. Like, you see all throughout the scriptures evidence of how God sends people into our lives to speak things into our lives that we so badly need. And I wonder, in all of those stories that I just referenced, how much different they might have been had someone not been willing to be that person that would step up and say what needed to be said. I wonder in my own life how different my story might have been if it wasn't for someone like Matt Kennedy, who was the youth pastor here when I was just attending here. And I began to feel God stir up in my heart a call to full-time vocational ministry, and I didn't know exactly what that looked like or what that would mean. And I had already served for a year in kids ministry, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that that was not the path that God was leading me down. And so I was a little bit like lost, going, God, what do you have for me? What do you want from me? And I remember walking into Matt's office, which is actually the office that I'm currently in right now. And I remember walking in there one Wednesday night and just looking at Matt, who had been such an influence on my life, and saying, man, I think I'm supposed to come and to serve with you to help figure out this ministry thing. I'll never forget, Matt looks up from his desk, just looks at me. I'm still standing in the doorway of his office, currently my office, and he looks at me and goes, I know I've been waiting for you. I know I've been waiting for you. Like, how much different could my story have been? How much different would Samuel or David or Moses' story have been if it weren't for having the right people in their life? And now I know that for many of us, you go, well, wait a second. Isn't that kind of what we're doing right now? Don't we show up and God uses preachers, and we listen to sermons on podcasts and on YouTube? Because doesn't God speak mainly like through like preachers and prophets? And yes, there's a really good history of that, but don't discount the good godly relationships in your life for how they can speak into your life. Don't think that it's only through pastors and prophets and teachers that God speaks. And that's what I want to show you today. We're actually going to go to the Old Testament book of Esther. If you can't find that, there's no shame in the game. Just go to the table of contents, open that thing up, and find Esther chapter 4, or you can hit the QR code in front of you and follow along with my digital notes. We're going to jump into the middle of the story of Esther in chapter 4. And if you're not familiar with the story overall, King Xerxes had a falling out with his wife and queen, and decides to have a competition of sorts to where he will find a new queen, and he invites all these women from all over his kingdom. And Esther, who happened to be of Jewish descent, ends up being the one that is chosen through this really gross sort of wife competition. And she ends up as the queen alongside Xerxes, but that didn't really mean much in those days because she didn't have any decision-making power. She wasn't like the first lady, like in the way that maybe we're used to them influencing things here and there or whatever it is. Like, she's nothing more than a piece of property with a title, essentially, is how Esther would have been seen in those times. And she's the adopted daughter of sorts of a Jewish man named Mordecai, who has a real issue with one of the king's officials named Haman, refuses to bow down when Haman walks by like everyone else. And so Haman, who's a very evil man in this story, decides that he is going to get rid of all of the Jews because Mordecai's disrespect. And we're going to pick up the story right there when Haman gets his plan approved by King Xerxes. Mordecai is very troubled, and we read this in Esther chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. He says, when Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on the burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. And he went as far as the gates of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while they were mourning and wearing clothes of mourning. And so when and as the news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. So when Mordecai finds out about Haman's plan and the fact that King Xerxes has signed off on this, he is deeply, deeply disturbed by what's going on. And so he does the right thing. If you know somebody that's in the position of Queen Esther, even if she's more like a piece of property with a title, it's better than the position that Mordecai was in. And so he sends word in verse 4. It says that when Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused it. And then Esther sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed as her attendant, and she ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was so troubling, why was he so troubled, and why he was in mourning. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gates. And Mordecai told him the whole story. He goes, listen, Haman felt disrespected because I wouldn't bow down before him. And so now he's gone to King Xerxes and decided he's going to kill all of the Jews. And so he tells this servant all of the plans and the decrees that have come. And then what happens next in verse 9, it tells us that Hathash, the servant, goes back to Esther with Mordecai's message. So then Esther sends back a message to Mordecai, relays this message in verse 11. It says, all the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him in many days. Okay, so what did we just read? What just happened? Mordecai asks Esther, will you go in front of the king and plead for your people? Will you go in front of the king and plead for your people? Esther's response, don't you know? Nobody goes in front of the king unless they've been summoned. Even the queen. The queen is sequestered off. She's not like I know that when we think king and queen in our mind, we're thinking of the movies that we've seen where there's one throne right next to another throne. And we're thinking, oh, well, she's right there. She's part of the mix. No, she's sequestered off. Even the queen was not allowed to walk into the presence of the king unless he had summoned for her. And she says, he hasn't summoned me in more than a month. I haven't seen the king in more than a month. I'm not in a position to do anything about this, Mordecai. I can't do anything whatsoever. And truthfully, because the penalty for showing up in the king's presence unannounced and uninvited was actually death, Esther has a pretty good excuse for not going and doing what Mordecai has asked her to do. Now, if Mordecai was most of us, when we kind of float an idea by someone and we get a little bit of pushback, we might be tempted to just lay it down there and go, you know what, that's okay. At least I tried. But Mordecai is undeterred by her initial response, and this is what he says in verse 13. He says, don't think for a moment because you're in the palace that you'll escape when all the other Jews are killed. He goes, don't think for a second that he won't find out where you came from, and that the same thing won't happen to you that's going to happen to the rest of us. And then he goes, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives, they'll die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? What did Mordecai just do? The first thing he does is he gives Esther a dose of reality. Don't think that just because you're the queen, you're going to escape the decree that says that they're going to kill all the Jews. He says the thing that really he probably doesn't want to say. He says the really hard thing that indeed it might hurt, but let's just be honest, we need it. We need that person that will come in and tell us what it is that we need to hear from God. That maybe we're so protected and shielded, or maybe you're in some sort of situation or relationships where people don't have the ability or the permission to speak into your life. Like, we need to hear those words from Mordecai and from the Mordecais in our life that may be uncomfortable to hear. And we may not appreciate it in the moment, but I promise you, you can look back and be so thankful that God sent someone to say those things to you. I'll never forget. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to just be honest. It doesn't paint me in a real good light. But I'm so thankful for this story because what it did was bring about a change in my life that was so necessary and might not have gotten there as quickly as we got there if God had not been so gracious as to allow this hurt to come to me. So here's what happened. The first year that I coached baseball, I just followed all the models that I had seen of baseball coaches growing up. Everything that I just thought coaches are just hard, tough people, and that's how you're supposed to be. And it doesn't really matter if these kids are 6 or 7. Like that's what I saw, that's what I thought. I had no clue what a disaster I had been for like a season and a half as a coach. Nobody around me said a word about it. It just felt like I was doing what, because everybody else is doing it also, so it just feels normal, looks normal. It's just what everyone, it felt like that's what you were supposed to do. But I had no idea. So I'll give you that backstory to say, I showed up after a weekend tournament. On a Monday, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes was having a golf scramble, and me and a couple of the guys from Southridge Church went to this golf scramble. And I don't golf a whole lot, so I don't have golf clothes, so I just wore the clothes that I coached in that past weekend, my cage jacket and all that. It's good to go if it rains or whatever. And so I show up and we golf, and then during the awards ceremony, a guy looks back and sees the cage jacket with my travel team logo on it, and sees my hat with my travel team emblem on it, and he looks at me, and I promise you, even though this sucked so bad in the moment, I know that this was God. He looked at me, a man I've never met this man in my life, turns around and said, "Hey, you're that guy that yells at those kids." I was like, what? I'm like so taken back. And first, one of the thoughts was, and nobody said anything? Where was Mordecai to say something? That God had to send a complete stranger. And I'm talking absolutely crushed me. Because I had a blind spot that I could not see, that nobody was saying anything about to my face. But the result was, now that I knew there was an issue, I could begin to change things. But like somebody had to come and say the thing that really hurt me, so that way I could change and things could be different. If you don't have that person in your life, you're missing out. And now when it comes to people speaking into your lives, can I give you a couple of rules to follow? Here's the first thing. When it comes to people saying hard things, or if you're the one that says the hard thing, know this rule, that there is a drastic difference between hurt and harm. A drastic difference. When I go to the dentist, it hurts, but it's so that way I get healthier. He's not intentionally trying to bring harm to me. So listen to this. Some of you got rid of someone in your life. You threw someone to the curb. You stopped being friends with somebody because they told you the hard thing, and you thought they were trying to harm you when they really just were going to hurt you in the moment so the way you could get better. There is a difference between hurt and harm. Just because somebody says something that you need to hear does not mean that they're trying to harm you. It actually probably means that they have your best interests at heart. Let me give you another guideline for this. This is especially important for the church crowd. That there's a drastic difference between accountability and abuse. You know how many people I've had to hold accountable in ministry that have ran to the next church and cried abuse? No, if you're in the wrong and someone that loves you holds you accountable, that's not abuse, that's love. Just because they say the hard thing doesn't mean that they're abusing you. Just because your boss has standards and holds you to those standards, that's not abuse. That's accountability. And it's very easy to go around when people say difficult things to us and cry abuse or harm, or these people don't have my best interest at heart. And that's not what we're saying whatsoever. We need people that don't mind hurting our feelings a little bit, so the way we can get healed and get some help. Because if you don't have those people, you might never hear what it is that God has to say to you that might actually bring about your healing and your growth. I also like that Haman doesn't just stop with saying the hard thing. Esther, don't forget, you're not going to survive this if this goes through. But he finishes what he has to say with this amazing quote. He says, "But who knows, Esther? Perhaps God has made you queen for such a time as this." So what he does is, yes, there's a bit of a wounding that goes on with the difficult thing that is said. Hey, you're not interested in helping us. Don't forget, you're not going to escape this. But do you see the bigger thing that God might be doing in your life? Do you have someone in your life that will do that as well? Do you have somebody in your life that will also help you raise your perspective up to a level that you can begin to see how God is actually moving and working and trying to get your attention in your life? That's what Mordecai's doing. Yes, he said the hard thing, but he also said, but I think God might be trying to use you, Esther. He speaks purpose into her life. Do you have that sort of person? I have sat down with countless people over the years in ministry across from the table. This is part of the reason why we have 2 interns going through the Trellis program right here at Southridge Church, is because I sat down with these people and I go, I see more in you than what you see in you. I'll never forget sitting down at the 5th Street Brewing Company at lunchtime with Will Ford. And we've been meeting regularly by that point, and I looked at him and I said, Will, have you ever thought about ministry as a trajectory for your life? He begins his 3rd year in school this year. He'll be graduating next spring. He'll be our first Trellis graduate. Do you have someone in your life that can look at you and say, I think you were made for more? I think that there's more in you. Right, I remember riding around with the staff one day, and I can't remember exactly where we were or what we were doing, but looking at Aaliyah, who's getting ready to start her 2nd year in the internship program, and telling her, I think God has really big stuff in store for you. Do you have that person in your life? Do you have those friends in your life that can see that and tell you that? If you don't, you're shutting off a channel that God might want to use. Now, here's the amazing thing about this story. If you know the rest of the story, Esther does go before the king. The king finds out about Haman's evil plot. He makes provisions to where the Jews are saved. Esther has saved the day. Haman gets killed. And it's a beautiful ending to the story based on how it started. God did amazing things, all because Mordecai would say the hard thing and call out purpose in Esther. But if you were reading those passages closely, you might see something really interesting throughout the whole book of Esther, but particularly in what we just said. And that's that there's no mention of God anywhere in the book of Esther. It's one of 2 books in the Hebrew Bible that do not mention God anywhere. So you might be going, wasn't Mordecai just trying to save his butt? Wasn't Mordecai maybe that was just a good idea that he had? How do we know that it's actually from God? How do we know Mordecai was acting on behalf of God, speaking on behalf of God? How do we actually know that? Well, in Jewish mindset and theology of that day, as they're writing their history, the Jewish people are thinking that everything that is said and everything that is done, that God is behind it. But it's a valid question. How do I know that if it's from God? Because how many of you don't have to raise your hand, but you've had somebody come up to you and say, hey, the Lord told me to tell you. And you're like, you sure? Because I'm certain that we've all been made privy to the fact that there are plenty of people that, quote unquote, speak on behalf of God that don't actually have your best interest at heart. There's plenty of people on TV that have a word from the Lord for you, if only you will give them $1,000. There's plenty of people that would love to speak into your life. So how do we know that Mordecai was speaking on behalf of God? How do we know that the people in our life are actually speaking on behalf of God? Because we can't just let everything in. We can't just act off of everything somebody has ever said. We need some sort of rubric of how do I know that God is speaking? If we're uncertain, I'm going to give you 4 principles real quick on discernment of how you know when God is speaking through someone else to you. And this is an important process for us because in 1 John chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, it says, dear friends, do not believe everyone who claims to speak by the Spirit. He says that you must test them to see if the Spirit has come from God, for there are many false prophets in the world. So don't just listen to everything everybody says, because some people don't have your best interest at heart. Rather, John says you need to test it. Here's how we test it. Here's number 1. Is it biblical? Is what this person is saying to you solid scripturally? Now, if you don't go back to week 2 and get you a discipline of reading this thing, then you're going to be easily led astray by anything that somebody might say to you. Again, we live in the most biblically illiterate society that has ever existed. If you don't get grounded in this thing, somebody will come along with a word from the Lord for you that might just destroy your life. And you won't know any better because you don't know this book. Because here's the deal. If God sends a word for you through somebody else, it will never contradict his word. He never talks out of both sides of his mouth. It will always line up with the scriptures. And so it's a safeguard for you to make sure that you are grounded in the scriptures. So is it biblical? Here's the second one. Is the source trustworthy? Is the source trustworthy? Listen, some of y'all are letting criticism into your heart from people that you wouldn't even go to for advice. You let anybody and everybody say something to you. Listen, is the source trustworthy? Like, you've got to consider the source when it comes to, is this person speaking on behalf of the Lord? We don't just say that everybody gets to have a say in our life. I will never forget, right over in our cafe, pre-COVID times, we used to serve a breakfast every Sunday morning. It was a good time. So I remember I'm over there congregating with some folks, and somebody comes up to me and says, "Pastor, I brought my friend. He's a prophet. He wants to talk to you." I said, "Okay, great." Because listen, after you've done this as long as I've done this, you already know what that means. Somebody's got a deal for you that you can't resist. So I'm like, great. So he drags me across the cafe in there to go talk to his friend. His friend puts his hand on my shoulder. It's a real big, heavy-handed guy. Like, you could just tell, like, he's used to probably getting his way. And he looks at me and he goes, "I'm a prophet from the Lord. And I have a word for your church. Because your church is in trouble. Our world is in trouble. I've got a word for your church. I need the opportunity to speak to your church." I said, wow, that's amazing. Because in my head I'm thinking, well, the Lord asked me to speak every week, so I think if he has something to say, he'll probably tell me. So he goes on, and so to try to give me, I don't think that this had the intended effect that he was hoping it would or not. He looked at me, and I'm not making this up because there's people in this room right now that can verify that this happened. This guy looked at me and said, "I knew 9/11 was going to happen 2 years before it happened." He thinks that's going to convince me to let him come and speak at our church. But in my mind, I'm thinking, why didn't you say anything? That makes you a horrible prophet. If you knew one of the greatest American tragedies was coming 2 years before it did, and you ain't tell nobody, you're a terrible prophet. You're not coming to speak at our church. You have to see, is the source actually trustworthy? Is the source trustworthy? Don't just receive anything and everybody whatsoever when it comes to this. Like, if you're going to receive a word from the Lord, make sure that it's from your friend that you know walks with Jesus. And the way that you know that they walk with Jesus is not just because they come to church or in your small group, but because you can see the fruit and the evidence that they walk with Jesus. Let me make this real practical. If you need financial advice, stop going to your broke friends. If you need dating and marriage advice, stop going to the people that can't hold down a relationship. Stop talking about it with your girlfriends or your friends or whatever. If they don't got it all together, then don't ask them to speak into your situation. No way. Don't give everybody access to speak to you like that. Because when it comes to discernment, the who is actually far greater than the what. Because if the source is not credible, then what they have to say doesn't matter at all. In fact, if you find someone that calls themselves a prophet, but they always say stuff that never happens. And you have found that, did you see all the COVID prophets? Those are false prophets. We tune them out. We turn the channel. We don't just go, well, better luck next time, fella. No, we don't just let everyone speak into it. So is it biblical? Is the source trustworthy? Let me give you the third one. Is it confirmed by others? Is what's being said being confirmed by other people? Here's the great example. Somebody told all them people in those early seasons of American Idol that they can sing. But somebody should have told them the hard truth, because it was not confirmed by others that these people could sing. Is what's being said to you actually confirmed by others? What this means is that when someone gives you a word from the Lord, you're actually meant to discern it within biblical community. So, and this is why if you're not in a small group at Southridge Church, you don't have friends at Southridge Church, you are missing it all. Because if someone gives you a word from the Lord, you need to sit down with about 3 or 4 people around you and go, is this something I should receive? Is this something I should act on? What do you see? What do you feel? As you pray and seek the Lord on my behalf, what do you think about this word from the Lord? It's meant to be discerned in community. And so it needs to be confirmed by other people. We're not an island unto ourselves. We actually need other people in the process. Proverbs 12:15 says, fools think that their own way is right, but the wise actually listen to others. They bring others into the fold. Here's the fourth way that you find out if what you're hearing is actually from the Lord, how we test it. Is it biblical? Is the source trustworthy? Is it confirmed by others? Here's the fourth. Do you feel at peace? Do you feel at peace? See, when somebody gives you a word from the Lord, even if it's a difficult one, there will be a peace in your heart that says that word was timely and that word was necessary. That's kind of how I felt about the time that I got confronted at the golf scramble. I didn't say that every time. Peace doesn't mean easy and comfortable. But I had a peace that I went, I think God just used this stranger to get my attention. The way things can be different. There will be a peace in your heart, even if it's difficult to grab a hold of. So not easy or comfortable, but just a peace that says, yes, I needed to hear that. Yes, I'll receive that. What an unbelievable story that because Mordecai said the hard thing and spoke purpose into Esther, the people are saved. Haman is put to death. It's amazing. All because Mordecai didn't hold back. So do you have those people in your life? Now here's the next step of this I want to hit y'all with real quick. Sometimes you're Esther, and there will be people that will speak into your life. And other times, when you get really in tune with the Spirit of God, hearing the voice of God, other times you get to be Mordecai. And sometimes you have the message for somebody else. And throughout your whole Christian journey, you need to be Esther and Mordecai. You need to receive what folks have to say, and sometimes God's going to use you to speak to people. And you're going to go, I don't know where that came from. I don't even know. I've never had that thought before. And you're going to know that it came from the Lord. Sometimes you need to be both Esther and Mordecai. I remember just probably a month and a half ago, we had an event up here for the ladies from Recovery Point. And all week long, I knew the sermon that I was going to preach. I had prepped it, and I got up here a couple hours early. I wrote my note cards out like I normally do before I teach. I clipped them on my Bible the way that you see right here. I'm ready to go. It's about 30 minutes before the event starts, and they're serving food over in the cafe to begin with. And I go in, I just start walking around. I see the ladies, and as I'm walking around, I feel this thing hit me that said, you have to change what you're doing. I said, what? I said, no, I've got like 30 minutes before I speak. Now's not the time for this, Lord. Because if you know anything about me, I'm always prepared. when I don't speak not being prepared. Like I've already got probably almost all of 2026 mapped out for us. I like to be prepared. So I'm walking through the cafe and I hear the Lord go, no, listen, you need to tell somebody in that room to not quit. Somebody in that recovery program is thinking about quitting. You need to tell them not to quit. I was like, but that's not really what I had planned in that moment. So I tried to fight it off for a second. I knew I was going to lose that. So I go and I sit back in my little chair where my wife is sitting right there. And I'm going, all right, God, well then you rewrite this sermon in the next 20 minutes. I took my note cards. I literally threw them in the trash. And I'm going, I'm just going to walk up there with the text that you gave me in this one phrase. Don't give up. Like, don't throw in the towel. That's all I have. Remember, I came up, I spoke, I walked off, and truthfully, I was just like, that was terrible. I get to the back, they start playing the music. And ladies in this room just start flooding to the front. And the first song finishes. We didn't even plan for a second song. We had to throw a second song on. The ladies just keep flooding to the front. And it didn't matter how prepared I was. Didn't matter how precise I thought the sermon was. Because God had a word for the people in that room that he made undeniably clear. When it was spoken, the Spirit of God moved. And there was probably people that were going to walk out the doors of Recovery Point and head back to their life of addiction that made different choices that night because the Spirit of God had something to say.